The most disturbing videos on the internet today. Let's dive in.
Bobby! No, Bobby!
Inside.
Bobby!
How crazy is this? They almost got Mr. Scribbles. Then he just hulks up.
Inside.
Unbelievable. The first one on the right kind of resembles, in my opinion, a massive petrified elephant's foot. What could these giant structures be in Russia?
Radium, another energy source of the old world, vilified and left out of our history books in large part. And if you pause to read some of these articles from the past, I think you'll know why it's left out. Do you want a small lump of fuel which will heat your home for thousands of years, requiring absolutely no attention or replenishing? That was once one of the biggest uses and benefits of radium. That is why all these old world cast iron stoves with no flues, but you can see clear as day radium written on them. It's because they weren't meant to be burned with wood. They were meant to be burned with radium. And you can see many articles and many uses in the past, from fertilizer, everything from cigarettes to the most important part, heating your home. And like that article said, for thousands of years, they were already using this source. It was just taken away and vilified, much like the Hindenburg false flag. You hear all about the radium girls, but yet they were using it in their butters, for foot warmers for the US mail service. Once the elites, the parasites, figured out just how powerful and unlimited of a source this was, even for health benefits, radium, another energy source.
Don't believe everything you see in this video. This is strictly for entertainment purposes only. Do your own research. Now, who is the Radium Girls?
We have a lot of people to thank for our current working conditions, but probably the most important are the Radium Girls. At the start of World War I, we started to discover that the pocket watches that had been so common were probably not very practical for soldiers. This led to the creation of the wrist watch. The leather strap held the clock piece in place on a wrist and made it a lot easier so that they weren't falling out of their pockets and breaking. But there was still one problem that the watch didn't solve. The faces were so dark that the soldiers could not see them when it was dark outside, but they didn't want it to be luminous enough that other soldiers from the opposing enemy could see the watches. This leads back to an element popularized by Pierre and Marie Curie back in the 1890s, and it was called radium. Marie Curie even called it the beautiful radium, despite the fact that it burned her skin several times, and Pierre Curie was so scared of it he never wanted to be near it. Everyone thought that this magical element was super fine and totally okay to be around all the time. Fast forward to about 1917, and now we have women in factories using this paint called undark paint that was made of radium to color these watches. The factories felt that women's tender and delicate hands were perfect for a job like this. They made about 1.5 cents per watch face, which usually led to about $20 a week. This was high rolling in the early 1920s, and more money than any girl ever made doing any job, even a factory job. They had a very interesting technique for painting these watches, though. It was called the lip dip paint technique. This was often taught and practiced at the US Radium, which was the largest contributor of radium in the nation, in their factory in Orange, New Jersey. These young girls, some as young as 11, were really just trying to make money for their families. People called them ghost girls because of the weird glow that they would get on their body and clothes after working with radium all day long. But this didn't frighten people. It actually was kind of a status symbol, and girls would wear their best dresses to work just so they could flaunt their glow later on in dance halls. Eventually, though, they started experiencing strange and severe health issues. The first girl to get sick was Amelia or Molly Magia. She started showing symptoms of a severe toothache in January of 1922. After going to a doctor suggested by the U.S. Radium Company, he told her that she was fine, it was just a toothache, and then eventually she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. When she went to a dentist to get her teeth looked at, he found a rotting tooth and decided to pull it, and to his horror, when he pulled it, parts of her jaw came out with it and disintegrated into ash. Unfortunately, her fight with radium didn't last very long, and she died in September of 1922. But things just kept getting worse and worse. The girl's mysterious illnesses just kept showing up, and the deformities became more obvious. This eventually led to a lawsuit in 1925, and it took 2 years for them to get a lawyer. In part 2, I want to talk about that battle. We have a lot of people to thank for our current working condition.
That is disturbing. This all stemmed from glow-in-the-dark wristwatches. I believe they have a movie about radium girls on Netflix. It makes you wonder why they were getting paid so much.
This photo was from 1923, and these women would buy the dial that they painted. So a lot of them decided to opt back into the brush. And I know what you're thinking. Well, at that point, it's there before the corporation was forced to pay out. Each radium girl ended up getting $177,000 dials. This photo was from 1923, and these women were called the Radium Girls. Now, in the 1920s, these women worked at a factory for a company called the U.S. Radium Corporation. Their job was to mix radium-infused paint and then paint the dials of watch faces and airplane dials. Now, a lot of these watches actually went to the military because the thing about radium paint is that it glows. So this allowed the soldiers to be able to check what time it was in darker conditions. Think of it as glow-in-the-dark paint, but using radium to get that glow. Not good. Well, in 1923, one of these women falls sick, and slowly all of her teeth start to fall out one by one until eventually she goes to the dentist, and as he's looking around her mouth, her jaw breaks off into his hands. Now I get it, this sounds like a playground myth, but this was the start of a side effect called radium jaw. The person's jaw would detach from the skull and then fall off. Now of course this shocks the other workers, but the company goes, no, it's fine, just go back to work, everything's okay. While these women would paint these dials, they were instructed to lip dip paint. The brushes that they used were made from camel fur, and after a few strokes, the brush would naturally start to fan out. So they were instructed to take the brush, put it in their mouth, and sharpen the tip with their tongue. Keep in mind, at the time, the company was telling these women, this was safe, it's all good, there's nothing to worry about. But the issue with radium is that its chemistry closely resembles calcium. So the body would then mistake the radium for calcium and start to pump it into all the bone tissue throughout the body. Calcium strengthens bones, whereas radium completely destroys it. And since these women were sharpening their brushes with their mouths, a lot of that radium got absorbed in their teeth and jaws. Not good. Now, unfortunately, the first woman that fell ill did eventually pass away. And the very next year, 50 women from that factory, it's all completely safe, you'll be fine. All of the coworkers that got sick, not related to this at all. Meanwhile, this is crazy. Nobody from the corporation actually handled the radium paint. And if they did, they would use tongs, masks, and lead screens. Well, the next year, the chief chemist ends up passing away, as well as several other female workers. And at this point, the dentists are the first to speak up. They start saying, a lot of your employees are coming in with awful dental health. Their teeth are falling out. We have to do operations. They've got ulcers. And the worst part, after every operation we do, none of the wounds heal, which then causes further infection. So something's going on here. So at this point, some medical investigations start up, and they start running these women through x-ray machines. But keep in mind, x-ray machines back then only filled these women up with more radiation, worsening their symptoms. It's oh my God, like in hindsight, it's so awful. But amongst some of the medical investigations, one of them was paid off by the company. And the goal here was to try and find something else they could pin all these side effects on, something other than their paint. So the company starts urging all medical staff to attribute the issues to syphilis. Now at the time, syphilis was a massive STI going around. And they figured with this being a group of women, they could push this smear campaign, basically putting all the blame on them and saying, look, all these health issues, it's them with syphilis. It's not our paint. It was so brutal. Basically just gaslighting the hell out of these women. Well, a couple years go by and nothing ends up getting done. And all the company does is swaps out the brushes for glass pens. Now, when the women start using these glass pens with the idea that they're no longer going to start putting the brushes in their mouths and the pen will work fine. The issue is, as the women started to use these glass pens, they were so much slower. And these women were paid by the dial that they painted. So a lot of them decided to opt back into the brush. And I know what you're thinking. Well, at that point, it's their problem. No, because at this point, Nobody knows what's causing these health issues. They don't know it's the paint. They don't know it's what's right in front of them because they're being told it's safe. Now, at this point, the Radium Girls decide to sue. They search all around and they eventually find a lawyer that will take their case. But the entire process was very slow moving. So slow, in fact, that the women continued to get sick. So much so that some of them had to drop out because they couldn't even raise their arm to take the oath in court. Now, after years and years, eventually the Radium Girls ended up winning in court. But of course, the company tried to get it overturned, and they would appeal and appeal and appeal. The Radium Girls ended up winning 8 times in court before the corporation was forced to pay out. Each Radium Girl ended up getting $177,000, that's been converted for today's rates, and then $10,600 annually for the rest of their lives. Plus, all medical and legal bills were paid by the company. Brutal, brutal, brutal. And that is the story of the Radium Girls.
This thing is literally screaming. This was made by an actual Radium Girl. Look at how this thing jumped to 60,000.
How
Radium, you, radium, you, radium, you, radium, I'm gonna dig it, boy.
We have actual radium clocks. Unbelievable. Look how bright that last one was. I gotta keep that one in Tupperware. Wow. Look how high it's reading.
until I
Oh, it's a plate. An orange plate.
2 more radium clocks found. Two more radium clocks found.
So I decided to answer this in a video because I actually found some radium clocks today. The baby Ben that you just saw is not radium, but these two that I'm showing you now are both radium. But all three are Westclox clocks, coincidentally enough. Glow-in-the-dark paint also glows under UV, so this is why the only way to really be certain what's radium and what's not is to use a Geiger. And you will notice as soon as we place the Geiger next to that radium clock, it starts to spike immediately, and pretty quickly as well. This is the spicier of the two clocks, but even this is not actually that bad for most radium. For those who are unaware, the main concern with radium isn't even the radioactivity itself, but the contamination risk, as every single one of those little tiny glowing dots you see inside of that glass is not dust, but rather it's flecks of radium paint that have chipped off over time.
Fever has done and got me down. Uranium fever is spreading all around. With a Geiger counter in my hand,
I'm going out to take me some government land.
uranium fever has done and got me down. Fever has done and got me down.
What an interesting piece. Looks like something haunted you'll see on like Luigi's Mansion or something.
Let's have a look at the truck itself. Here we have the large tires. These large tires are extremely expensive. We're talking about $60,000 US a piece, right? The truck itself is approximately $4 million, and it's a big investment, but it's hauling approximately 242 metric ton of material at one time. That's massive, right? This is a conventional diesel electric truck. That means that it uses a diesel engine with a generator mounted to the back of it, and it's creating AC power. It uses power. It's a big diesel engine and a large fuel tank, and that fuel tank's around 4,000 liters, 1,200 gallons, and a massive dump tray that can carry 240 metric ton of ore, dirt, anything you want to put into it. Let's have a look at the truck itself. Here we have the large tires. These large tires.
That truck we just looked at said they can handle 250 tons in today's technology. This bell to my left is over 200 tons, and according to Wikipedia, this bell was made in the 1600s. So how exactly did they move this bell?
A little curious of what this door was on the end of this brick house. And then I open it up. It is a mobile home. Still got the tail lights on it. Look at the brick wall. Somebody has bricked around a mobile home, and then they added on to the front of it. What if it's got the wheels under it? That's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Then I walk right here and look, and there's a tongue for it. They bricked around it, didn't even cut it off. This thing's some kind of special. It's nice. I was a little curious.
At first glance, you might be thinking he's out of his mind, but because he leaves the tongue out on the trailer, he's able to save on his taxes. Yeah, it looks grungy, but it's efficient. What was this place built for? Tea parties? Like, there's literally no bathrooms. It's like this fancy place is designed for like a giant tea party.
Thank y'all for watching that Spiritual Crazy Funny Reactions. I appreciate everything. Thank you for everything. Ashe. Peace and love. Ashe.